How's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so today I thought I'd try to say something about the German philosopher Schopenhauer and his view on compassion and wherever else that leads. Okay, so Arthur Schopenhauer, what did he believe? Well, he believed that compassion was the true foundation or basis of morality. In fact, he was one of the first to say something like this, along with the Scottish thinker David Hume. Basically, what he does is he opposes any rationalist or religious account of ethics, and instead he grounds his view in the direct experience of another being's suffering. So for him, genuine ethical behavior, it doesn't issue from abstract principles or religious commands, but rather it comes from the felt identification of the pain of others. Okay, but let's get into a bit more detail here. And first, let's look closely at what it is that Schopenhauer opposes, because I think that might be helpful. So one of Schopenhauer's central targets is the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. So for Kant, the basis of morality lies in pure reason, or what he calls the rational will and the categorical imperative. Now, Schopenhauer argues that this is just way too formal and too cold, in the sense that it's far too removed from the sorts of motivations that fuel moral action. As he himself says, and here he's directly referencing Kant, he says, "No theory of morals can have any real significance if its basis is alien to concrete experience." In other words, human beings act morally not because they recognize some abstract rational principle, but because they just experience the suffering of others as if it were their own. So again, compassion and not reason is the real genesis of ethical behavior. Schopenhauer's ethics is deeply personal and affective, not impersonal. Ethics without compassion is just an empty shell. Okay, but now it gets even more interesting. And that's because this focus that Schopenhauer has on compassion, it's actually tied to his larger metaphysical view. You see, Schopenhauer was influenced by Eastern philosophies like Buddhism and Hinduism, and so he believed that all of us, all individual beings, are actually just one thing. That is, we're all manifestations of one sole underlying force that he calls the will. In Hinduism, of course, this bears similarity to the concept of Vedanta, where the world is viewed as a manifestation of Brahman, which is the ultimate formless reality. And so the basic idea in Hinduism is that the world of appearances and individuation is secondary to this larger, deeper reality. Anyway, so back to Schopenhauer. So Schopenhauer argued that any kind of individual uniqueness and separateness that we perceive between ourselves and others is, on his view, a kind of illusion. And again, that's because for him, we're all interconnected. We're all fundamentally one. So Schopenhauer's idea is that when we feel compassion, it's because this illusion of separateness that we're all living has been momentarily pierced. In other words, in that moment, we've seen through the veil of individuation and recognized our communal being. So it's interesting because in a very real way, to feel another's pain as our own is not just sentiment, it's actually a profound metaphysical insight. Now, before I move on, I should briefly say something about Schopenhauer as a person because it's kind of funny and also kind of sad. So if you don't know, Schopenhauer wasn't the nicest and most positive of human beings. Suffice it to say, he didn't have many friends, if any. And women clearly didn't take to him which is no surprise, by the way, when you make it a point to argue that females are inferior. He was an obstinate and cantankerous individual. Yet for all of that, ironically, for his lack of compassion in the realm of human beings, he did have one real love object: his dog, or a succession of poodles, to be exact. As Nietzsche said of him, when he failed to find trust in people, he'd always return with a heavy heart to his faithful dog. So I think it's here that Schopenhauer is most instructive and, in a way, uplifting in his concern for the suffering of animals. Because it wasn't just about his dogs, he was truly concerned with all animal welfare. I mean, just to take one example, at one point he writes that the greatest benefit of the railroads is that they spare millions of horses their miserable existences. And actually, Schopenhauer sums all of this up by a Latin expression that he borrows, which translates as injure no one. And no one includes animals. And it's not an accident that in his study at home, Schopenhauer showcased, alongside a bronze Buddha and a bust of Immanuel Kant, 16 portraits of canines. Now again, as much as Schopenhauer lacked in his feelings for his fellow men and women, the fact that he had such compassion for animals is telling. It's telling in the sense that it shows us not just how progressive he was for his time, but it also shows us how for him there really was no distinction between the species. In other words, both we humans and animals share a metaphysical essence. In this sense, there's no sharp moral boundary between us. Now, that we're ontologically the same like this, that's really a remarkable and revolutionary claim. I mean, think about the dominant Christian tradition, both of his time and maybe actually of our time too. This tradition is clearly anthropocentric in its outlook. It says that we humans are the very pinnacle of creation, and animals, well, they're here to serve us. Well, this sort of view just reveals our arrogance, Schopenhauer thinks, but more importantly, it also reveals our ignorance for him, because it's just not true. Human supremacy just doesn't reflect the larger metaphysical reality, and therefore it's unjustified. So maybe Schopenhauer is onto something. Maybe it all begins with those we share the end of our couch with, namely our dogs. Those creatures who, when we look into their eyes, remind us what genuine moral feeling looks like, and ultimately where compassion proves itself the truer guide. Bye for now.